This is the panel discussion for Las Vegas City Council seat, Ward 2. We have with us two candidates. One is current Councilman Robert Beers, and we thank you for coming. And then Mr. Raja, I'm so sorry, I'm probably going to butcher your name here.
This is fine.
Okay, so we also have his challenger, Mr. Fayyaz.
Raja's last name, you can use the Raja, is fine. So, yeah.
Okay, Fayyaz Raja. All right, so Mr. Raja, you're both here, and thank you. We appreciate your time. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate it very much. We also have a panel here, and we appreciate your time as well. My name is Stephen Stubbs. I'm the attorney in town, and I'm the moderator. The way this will work is each of you will be given 30 seconds for an opening statement. We are strict on time here. I will cut you off and not allow you to finish your sentences. And it's not because I don't like you, it's just because we have time and we want to be efficient and we want to be fair. And so when your time is up, we will cut you off. The panel will present questions to you. You will have 1 minute to respond. If you're the other candidate, and only if the other candidate mentions the other person in their response, the other person will have an opportunity to rebut. Okay? We also have follow-up questions, and we'll play it out that way. Okay? And we'll try to make this as fair as possible. So this time we're going to start with Mr. Jason Brooks. Mr. Brooks, do you have a question?
Starting with the 30 seconds of...
Oh, excuse me.
No
You're right. There, I just explained what we were doing. I wasn't doing it. Okay. So, Mr. Raja, would you please do your 30-second opening statement?
Thank you. I thank you for having me here. I just wanted to thank you for the veteran, the political international to hosting me and having me here. I wanted to thank you for that. All my informations are on my website, voteforraja.com. Since we have a 30-second, I just wanted to share that you can look at. I've been 30 years over in that ward living, and I believe that I could...
Thank you very much. Your time is up. Mr. Beers.
Thank you very much. This is the coolest job I've ever had, and I would like to do it again. So I'm here to ask for your group's endorsement today. 10 years in Carson City, we argue about abstract philosophy. We might win this afternoon's debate, but tomorrow morning we start over again. In 10 months as city councilman, I have more than 10 stories about helping people that are cooler than my best story in 10 years in Carson City.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we'll start with our questions from our panel. Mr. Jason Brooks.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here today. Apparently you caught the tail, and usually we start up the other side, so it's going to go easy for you. My question is going to be the same that I just asked the last two gentlemen about helping homeless veterans. As you know, City of Las Vegas, we have double the national average of homeless veterans. There's 62 of every 10,000 people in our population are homeless veterans. So we have 1,430 homeless veterans just from last year alone. So question is going to go for Mr. Beers is kind of like, what have you done while you're in City Council or sitting on the board to try and help veterans in your district? And Mr. Raja, it's going to be, given the opportunity, what are you going to be able to bring to the table to try and assist homeless veterans to get them, back and stable into a good home life?
Mr. Beers.
Well, the city in general, the city council in general, has put some resources onto the homeless problem. We fund, as Stavros said, a number of specific programs. We do as well have a small version of specialty courts going on inside municipal court. I've interviewed all the muni court judges and asked them about what specialty court programs they have and learned about that. I would continue to support those programs as best we can. They're kind of all federal grant funded right now. And there's always the danger that that will go away, particularly since many of us think the federal government has just now started just printing the money, not borrowing it anymore before they print it. So I'm certainly aware of the problems and certainly actively involved in learning what the solutions can be.
Thank you.
Mr. Raja.
Thank you. For the homeless, I personally think the last year federal government had allocated $13 million for the Nevada. When I look at those statistics, that we have one given time about 9,400 homeless they are living in this city. And I think the federal government should have a little bit helping hand with the city and the county and the state. I think that's a very big issue. We should ask for federal government's help, and I think they're contributing that, and we should ask for the local, the private sector also to help.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Andre Haynes.
What is one of the greatest challenges that the city faces that they failed to handle? And in the future, how would you handle it differently?
Can we start with Mr. Raja this time, please?
Well, city, right now, I think that we are going through a very hardship. We got billions and billions of dollars in Nevada. Equity has been evaporated because of the down economy. Because of that, billions and billions of dollars has been evaporated in economy. We lost 50% of our tax. So it's affecting that. I think that's the major issue, that we need to bring the business, we need to bring the economy in order to move forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pierce?
Biggest place the city's missed the boat is in not keeping track of all the many areas of our lives where we have mandates to always increase the amount of money we're spending on a problem. They're woven throughout NRS, they're even woven throughout municipal code. We found one this week, or last week. Tuesday, I learned that there's a city ordinance that 1% of all capital spending must be allocated for public art. We're facing a year where we may well have to lay off firemen and policemen, which I think goes to the very core of why we have local government, which is the provision of public safety. And so I've requested a resolution be drafted. It will be introduced in the next couple of weeks to undo that. At least let's take the decision off automatic pilot and require that the council soberly deliberate it as a priority against all the other priorities that the city has.
Thank you very much. Mr. Byron Brooks?
I'm going to pass.
Okay. Mr. Churchill?
I was going to go ahead and ask the same question I asked before, but pretty much know what the answer would be. I really want to ask a question when it comes to a problem that we had in North Las Vegas a few months ago, an accident on Decatur and Craig, where a pickup truck T-boned a Medic West vehicle. Looking into that matter, I found out that only the fire departments have the Opticon system, and not even our police have the Opticon system through the valley. But maybe more specifically, Medic West AMR as a private ambulance service. It turns out that that passenger that was being transported to the hospital, I believe she had some type of heart issue. It was found out that she didn't die from her condition, but she died from the impact of that accident. No guarantee that a vehicle will not cross a red light, but I have a real concern about police officers going on a hot call without that Opticon system, as well as the private ambulance services. Many times our firefighters are in the ambulance as well. I believe I may have sent you something or spoke to a mutual friend of ours, Councilman Beers, Bob Mercero, on this issue here, and mentioned that you were thinking of looking into that matter and taking it up. What are your feelings about providing that safety net to both the police and the private ambulance services, serving our community and taking our residents back and forth like that?
Now, one thing I would ask you to clarify, could you please briefly state what the Opticon system is?
It, as you approach a green light, it it picks up a signal from the vehicle and it changes it to green for you to go through in a more safely fashion without having to slow down and try to catch the attention of the drivers going across you.
Thank you very much. Can we start with Mr. Beers this time?
Sure. My style at City Hall, in an attempt to only alienate my new colleagues slowly, has been to very deliberately investigate when these kinds of issues come up. And it took quite a while to come up with the counter argument. By the way, I don't buy it. But it is this. It takes sometimes up to a half hour for the normal cycling of the traffic signal at the intersection to return to normal after it's been opticonned. I don't find that compelling, and am in favor of expanding the Opticon utilization to the police and the ambulance services. The big question is, where do we come up with the money to do that? And the bigger question from the perspective of a sitting Las Vegas City Councilman is, how do you count to 4 on that, which I have not done yet, which is why I have not introduced the ordinance.
Thank you very much. Mr. Raja?
Thank you. Very good questions, Richard. I agree with Bob with this because we should have that, because there's lives at stake. So we should have with the police and with the fire department. Question comes about how we can afford it to do that. So we got to look at the other budget situation where we can take some budget. The allocation part to see if that's feasible to allocate on this where there's a lives are involved. So I think I support that. Thank you.
And because Raja mentioned my name, I get to rebut. It's not just the police.
I'm sorry.
And
I'm sorry, Mr.
And the ambulances.
Mr. Beers,
It's all the rest of us
Beers,
driving around.
Mr. Beers,
whose safety is at stake here as well.
Okay, just because someone says, I agree with it and mentions your name does not mean you get to rebut. And I would appreciate you honoring the moderation.
Follow the rules.
Okay, but that's my job, to make sure the rules are followed. So from now on, let's make sure that we follow the moderator, because that's how I roll. So, Mr. Travis Barrett.
Mr. Raja, I noticed on your website that you served on the Metro Use of Force Board. And I wanted to get some comments from you on that without, as it were, salting the mind. Tell me something about working on the Metro Use of Force Board.
I wish I had more time than a minute to answer that question, but in a short version, last 3 years I've been on the police use force and the citizen review board, but I'll answer that question directly too. It's a very, very exciting as a board member to sit on when we look at the whole situation, when police officers use the force, and we have to look at, is it justifiable or not justifiable? And I tell you, my experience has been wonderful. It's been wonderful. We look at very clearly, we are none of us police officer, very one or two maybe, but all civilian. And we'll look at very carefully and listen, and investigation is being done, and there could be hundreds and hundreds of pages. All the details are there, and we make a decision based on that.
Thank you very much. And out of fairness, Mr. Beers, would you like to address the Use of Force Board?
I don't serve on that. I have, however, for the past 3 years, served on the Nevada Advisory Board to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, where we meet about 4 times a year. A group of people from across the political spectrum, all of them very active. And our role is to develop an agenda in the form of a report that is submitted, as well as all the other states, to the big U.S. Civil Rights Commission. I'm almost certain in the next report that we will be recommending that the Civil Rights Commission keep an eye on the Metro Use of Force issue here in Las Vegas. Granted, there have been some significant changes in the last 6 months, we hear, and we're waiting to see the effect of those changes. So I don't know that the commission will take it up immediately, because there are big changes underway that Metro is self-creating.
Thank you very much.
I love the last part of that answer.
We hear.
Hey,
Metro is self-creating. I love it.
now,
Wait.
Okay, you're gonna
You
do
go
that.
ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, just to clarify, if they say something about you, you get to rebut, if someone agrees with you and you want to rebut that they agree with you or what your previous statement, maybe you shouldn't be running for council. But anyway, I'm just saying.
Get my,
Filing's closed, it's too late.
Okay, Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Beers, did I set you up an appointment to go tour U.S. vets?
I don't remember if we talked about it or you did.
I was just
I
wondering if
did
you
not,
would.
I have not had the tour yet.
Do you want me to go with you?
Yeah, love to.
Okay.
We get to do about a field trip a week, so, yeah,
Is it graham crackers and milk?
not yet.
Okay. And I would assume that would be open to Mr. Raja if he wins the seat, correct? Thank you very much. It's Mr. Kenneth Wagner.
Sorry I'm late. Mr. Beers, I'm sorry, Councilman Beers. When I go out to arrest somebody, I can change the lights in my vehicle. When I call dispatch for us to get back up, there seems to be a lot of wait for Metro to go through so that I can get back up when I'm out to arrest someone. And I'm just curious, I believe that you voted no on the new tax for Metro. Was that correct? I really need to know. I mean, I know everybody keeps begging for more money, but when I'm arresting someone and it takes 15 minutes for me to get back up, even though I can change the lights when I go and I can, without that problem, the funding doesn't seem to be that much. Why is it you voted no for, so that we could get more people to, answer my calls when I call in? And I just need to know why you voted no. Thank you.
Happy to explain that vote. One of the reasons would be that miraculously in such a tight financial environment, they just found $25 million to buy a new radio system, which will go to the failure of the existing radio system. But in general, I cast that vote because I didn't believe that increasing a quarter-cent on the sales tax, yet again, recall that the second quarter-cent has been implemented by the legislature. It's just they kept it. They didn't put it to the police department like we people had voted. So the question is, should we add a third quarter-cent sales tax now? And I believe that doesn't address the problem, which is a infrastructure, a state law infrastructure that mandates that spending be increased every year, even if revenue is flat. That's really what's going on at Metro. Is they're suffering from the impact of that set of state laws that mandates spending on their largest expense always be increased. That's what we need to go up to Carson City and address.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Raja, would you like to address the quarter-cent increase in sales tax to fund additional Metro?
I think I support that, and that's my answer.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Darby.
Yes, one of the candidates earlier today was talking about all the out-of-state plates and, in other words, the out-of-state workers that work on our projects here. And that's a concern of mine. I'd like to hear you talk about that, because when these contracts are let, sometimes they're let to a quote-unquote Nevada company who hires everybody from Utah and Arizona and so forth. And that's been a concern, and I just wonder if it's a concern of yours.
Can we start with Mr. Raja this time?
Would you be specific on the contract part a little bit, more, so I can understand?
Just as a general issue, are you concerned that we have so many out-of-state workers working on projects here in Las Vegas?
And I'll give you an example also with my answer with that. For example, there was a Fremont Street, the lighting system was installed by a local company. I mean, the project was started, but the city decided to contract out of the state, out of the country even, to get a company to do the work. I don't think that the way it should be. It should be the local company, just like we have with the paving and all other issues that came up. So I support that it should be a local company to do the contract and work also, because the economy will help itself if we hire local people to do the job. Thank you.
Mr. Beer?
Well, I think the question was, are you concerned that so many out-of-state workers are doing Nevada jobs? No, I'm not. I'm concerned about all the Nevada workers who are forced to work out of state today. I talked to one yesterday who spends the week in North Dakota and comes back here to see his wife and kids on the weekend. That's because our economy here is still lagging the rest of the country. And toward that end, I'm very actively involved in the limited handful of ways that city government can build the economy and help businesses to create jobs in the valley.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Karen Steele.
I have to remember what the question was. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here tonight. Mr. Beers, I'd like to start with you. You have held one office or another since 1999, is that correct?
I was in the legislature from 1999 to 2008, and then I was elected to the city council in 2012.
Okay, I see. In all that time, you say now you love your job and you want to keep it. In all that time, how are we to believe that suddenly you have found the answer to all the ills in Nevada, and before that you haven't really accomplished much, in your own words?
Well, I engaged in an awful lot of argument on abstract philosophy for 10 years. But I guess I'm not sure I understand your question. I think all people who stand for elected office get in there and do their best. I think that's exactly what Raha plans. That's what I have planned. That is what you would have planned if you had chosen to jump up here on the dais with us. So you just get in there, learn the job as best you can, and try to figure out how to make it work. I think I've been very effective actually in the last 10 months, and I think I have earned another shot.
Thank you. And Mr. Raja, you are a community activist, yes?
Yes.
How could you better serve the community as a city council member than an activist?
Well, I engage the constituency, the local, the people who are in the ward. I will engage them if I'm elected. Take example of the neighborhood watch. That's one example. They attend the meeting with the police department every month. They listen. They look at the crime rates. They look at what's in the neighborhoods going on. They watch everybody and they report that. So I will be, as an activist, I will be part of that engaging Ward 2 people and talking to them, finding out what's the problem. Even a small problem like a hoarders, we'll definitely look at that if I'm elected.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. George Asai.
Thank you, Steve, and thank both of you for being here. It's not easy putting your lives under a microscope, and I commend you for seeking public office. And in that regard, our Constitution was created to limit the powers of the federal government. It was based upon individual states' rights and liberties by the individual. I think it was James Madison that once said, if men were angels, we would not need government. So they gave us a Republican form of government. We elect you folks, you make the smart decisions. If they wanted a direct democracy, they would have given us that. But they didn't do that because the greatest tyranny can come from a direct democracy where the majority will oppress the minority. That being said, what is each of you, your philosophy regarding the role of government and its responsibility to the individual citizen? And in that regard, do you believe in general, do we have a spending problem or do we have a revenue shortage problem?
Can we start with Mr. Beers on this one?
Sure. City governments don't have a revenue problem because they don't have much influence over their revenue. That's set by Carson City for us, and our job is to execute the spending of those dollars as efficiently as possible, achieving the goals. The first part of your question, the philosophy of government that drives me personally, I believe at my core that the point of government is the protection of individual liberty. The government is the least efficient way to get anything done, therefore that we should limit the things that we do with it, because if there's any other way to get it done, we should do it that way. That being said, drilled down to a city government level, the city government's primary responsibility is the provision of public safety. And there's a number of other responsibilities in there, but that's 75% of our spending and 75%, I think, of our responsibility. And I'm pretty supportive of our efforts in that area.
Thank you very much. Mr. Raj?
Thank you. Judge, that's a good question. I believe that the personal freedom and the safety, that's the very important for as a citizen. But as for is the city, because the revenue is, they don't have a control on revenue, they have a control on spending. So their first bar should be safety of the citizen. You look after of the needy people, the people that who could use the help. That could be the first priority for the city. Since they don't have a control on the revenue part, that should be considered very carefully where the dollar has been spent on that. The freedom is very important for all the individuals. So, and that's my response. Thank you.
Thank you. The panel has gone through the first round of questioning. Are there any follow-up questions? And I might add, I do have one as well. Mr. Assad?
Thank you, Steve. This is, again, revolving around the Constitution, the Second Amendment specifically. You've both been elected to the City Council, let's say. There was a 3-3 vote. The issue is Las Vegas City Council would like to ban assault-style rifles, semi-assault style rifles, semi-automatic assault style rifles, AK-47s, AR-15s, shotguns. They would also like to limit the magazine to no more than 10 rounds. How would you vote to break that tie?
No.
And Mr. Raj?
I would say no too.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, Mr. Churchill.
Seeing that we have a former legislator on the dais right now, some of our biggest restrictions locally to government are two things: the open meeting law and the lack of appropriate home rule. Do you see the difference between being a legislator on those issues and now having to deal with those issues locally?
And may I just, we had this before, we wanted to define home rule because it's used in so many different ways, so could you please define home rule?
Generally speaking, the ability to make some decisions on our own locally over here, as opposed to the state legislature pretty much mandating us or not allowing us to do certain things.
Yeah, specifically, the law grants cities the ability to do just what the law grants it. So if the law is silent, cities can't do it. You know, it never came up very much in Carson City, interestingly enough, in my 10 years there, all of which were under Bill Raggio's leadership of the Republican Senate. I wasn't in the Senate the whole time, but it never came up, and I think Bill never wanted to discuss it. Now, of course, he's passed, and it's a new legislature, so we'll see what they do with it. As far as the open meeting law, that is the worst law I have ever seen. That is just simply the most glaring, blatant example of unintended consequences of any legislative action I have ever seen in my life. It's amazing. In order to comply with it or break it, I'm not sure which, whatever the lawyers tell us to do. 3 of us meet on Monday afternoon, and 3 of us meet on Tuesday morning, go through the full agenda, ask the same normal questions y'all would ask if you saw the agenda, and they get answered within 6 or 8 hours, and so they never get asked
Mr.
again,
Beers.
and the citizens never get a chance to hear the answer.
Mr. Beers, I'm sorry. We do have to adhere to the rules, and so I will cut you off and continue saying your name until you stop talking. So, and it's not because I don't like you, it's just because I'm trying to adhere to the rules. So, Mr. Raja.
I think the legislature has the duty to pass those laws. I think that we should keep it that way. I support that. But if they decided to change that, that's their prerogative. As for is the open meeting law, I support that. Because it brings up there is a mandate, there is a rules, there is a certain procedure you have to follow, there is a regulation, and I support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Darby, you have a follow-up question?
Well, I think I probably disagree with Mr. Beers on an awful lot of things, but I was really happy to hear what he said about the open meeting law. Just an aside, I have a friend on the State Board of Education, and I was talking about the whole process, and they said, "Can you get the?" No, I can't talk to more than 2 people at a time, or I violate. And I said, "Well, what about?" No, that would violate the open meeting law. What about this? No, that would violate the open meeting law. And I was just astounded that they virtually can't communicate with each other because of that law. It was an eye-opener to me.
Thank you. Now, I do have a follow-up question. It's a question that was given to some previous people in other panel discussions. There are some that are not happy with some of the actions of our police department. And there are some that say that civil rights are violated on certain times. And I'm not saying if they are or they aren't here in this forum. But what power do you have as a city council to ensure that civil rights are guarded and protected? Can we start with you, Mr. Raja?
Well, since I've been the Citizen Review Board, recently I noticed that the federal also kind of sit in and listen the issues that we have. As a city councilman, if I'm elected, I think that looking into the police department, you give 30% the budget. I think there should be a oversight committee that see that they should kind of also question, look at their the issues that they have. So just beside the Citizen Review Board, but the city councilman also should have some kind of mandate. They should create some kind of I call it law or something that to as the 30% that you're budgeting, so there should be a response. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beers.
This is actually an instance of home rule. 40 or so years ago, for affronts no one remembers, the legislature took away from the city of Las Vegas its ability to have its own police department and created Metro to service both the county and the city. And purposefully set up a governance structure that is governance light. The city's real only influence is through the reach of the Fiscal Affairs Committee, and it's primarily a fiscal reach. We can ask, and we have already asked, the sheriff to come in and explain what he's doing to us, and it's been helpful. But he certainly has no obligation to come and do that whenever we ask. So the answer is you build a cooperative relationship with a group of people, both at Metro and at the city and at the county, and together you try to move the ball forward and reduce the tension on the streets that leads to these incidences.
Thank you very much. If there are no more follow-up questions, we have time for one more if someone has one. One more, Mr. Saad.
Regarding the open meeting law, it's ironic that the only body not subject to the open meeting law is the legislature. They can meet in closed session, they can meet in committee, they can meet in secret with no transparency. But I am on the Transportation Commission with 2 other commissioners. I cannot have a conversation with either one of those commissioners when a license application comes before me. I have to talk to the staff attorney. He has to go talk to the Transportation Commissioner, and then we have to do the circuitous discovery of information. City council members, you cannot talk to more than a majority at one time. You can talk to maybe 2, but you can't talk to 4 because that would constitute a quorum. It is the most ridiculous law the legislature has ever passed under the guise of transparency. It is a drastic unintended consequence of good intentions. And that's what happens sometimes when people with good intentions, who are not lawyers, make laws for the benefit of others. It is, and I'm working at it right now as a transportation commissioner, it is impossible to work around the open meeting law. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Okay, so that was a statement and not a question?
One-
Mr. Darby?
one quick comment. That's what happens when the Review Journal runs the state.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. We do have closing statements that you can speak about anything you wish. They are 30 seconds. And once again, I do cut people off and say their name until they stop talking. So could you please start with your closing statement, Mr. Pierce?
Thank you very much. Well, 30 seconds doesn't leave much. I've not been able to list any of those 10 things that are much cooler accomplishments than what I did in the legislature. Call me if you have any questions. 592-8822 is my cell. Google my name. My cell will come up right next to it. I return calls. I answer emails. I take my responsibilities to my constituents very, very seriously. And I've been doing this full-time since July 2nd. And am very grateful for the opportunity and would like to do it again. So I'd like your votes if you live in Ward 2.
Thank you very
Tell
much.
your friends.
That is your
I'd
time,
like your
Mr.
endorsement.
Pierce. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Raja.
I thank you for having me. I appreciate for giving me the opportunity to come in and speaking and sharing my my views. My website is voteforraja.com. You can look it up and also find out about all the detail about me. Since there is a short time, and I have a phone number also there, so you can call me if there's any question. And I thank you for having me, and I appreciate for all the good questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our candidates, especially for being here. Thank you very much. And we will start in exactly 7.5 minutes with Las Vegas City Council Ward 6.